Welcome everyone to the Planet MicroCap Showcase. I'm pleased to introduce our next presenter here at our event. It is Dr. Faz Chowdhury from Nemaura Medical. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is NMRD on NASDAQ. And with that, Dr. Chowdhury, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Robert. And it's a pleasure to be speaking today. And I would like to thank Planet MicroCap for the invitation to speak. So I'm Faz Chowdhury, as Robert mentioned, the CEO of Nemaura Medical. And first of all, just a few forward-looking statements, if you would. Let's go straight into what exactly is it that Nemaura Medical are focusing on as a company. So the area that we are working within is the area of obesity and diabetes, which are currently two of the key drivers of the chronic disease epidemic. And now, if you think about it, there are over 500 million people around the world with diabetes, and there are probably in the region of 3 times that number that have pre-diabetes, if not more. So in other words, the healthcare expenditure is significant worldwide. And in some territories, the statistics are that up to 15% of the entire healthcare budget is spent on either managing the disease or the complications of diabetes. So it's an enormous problem, and it's one that is yet to be adequately managed. And so it therefore presents also a tremendous market opportunity. The question is, so what exactly are we as a company focusing on in order to address the needs of that market? And the area we're focusing on is essentially a body-worn sensor that allows continuous monitoring of glucose. And continuous monitoring is essential, really, to be able to effectively manage diabetes, and also to be able to detect pre-diabetes early on and hopefully prevent the onset of diabetes in the first place. And if you look at this, where you've got a graph here where you can see the full picture when you actually have your full daily profile through a continuous glucose monitor. Whereas if you were to just take finger prick measurements on an intermittent basis, you can see how you could potentially miss all the really important information with regards to fluctuations in your sugar levels, which are extremely important with regards to long-term prognosis and the management of diabetes. So our vision of the company is really to make significant, let's say, penetration into 2 particular market areas. One being the pre-diabetes area and the obesity area, where essentially we're looking at, let's call it preventative medicine, and then in the management and potential reversal of type 2 diabetes. And so that's our goal as a company over the coming years. In terms of our approach, how are we going about trying to achieve that then in terms of either prevention of diabetes or the management of type 2 diabetes? So what we've developed is a body-worn sensor, which is applied to the upper arm. And what it allows you to do is to measure glucose without putting any needles, without putting any filaments inside the arm. So our sensor sits on top of the arm, and it measures glucose levels, and it sends it by low energy Bluetooth every 5 minutes to a mobile phone, so that over the course of the day, you can actually see your glucose profile as opposed to just point in time measurements. And this is a unique technology in that currently, as far as we're aware, it is a one of a kind in the world. There are no other non-invasive continuous glucose monitors that you can wear on any day that you choose. And so in that sense, we do have a significant first mover advantage. From the point of view of product positioning in the medical market, so there'll be 2 areas I'll be talking about today. One is how we are positioning our product in the medical market and why. And secondly, how we are positioning our product in the non-medical market, i.e. the consumer space. So in the medical market, first of all, quite simply put, there will be the opportunity for individuals to purchase the sensors and essentially measure their glucose profiles over the course of the day on any days that they choose. Now, for that reason, because our sensor is a daily sensor as opposed to a sensor that's worn, let's say, 10 or 15 days at a time, it is ideally suited to the type 2 market. And the type 2 diabetes market is approximately 90% of the overall diabetes market. So the 500 million or 450 million people that I mentioned that currently have diabetes around the world, around 90% of those have type 2 diabetes. And the reason why a daily worn sensor is most suited to this market is because type 2 diabetes is predominantly a lifestyle-based condition. So in other words, you will make interventions over the course of the month, and then maybe a few days at the end of the month, you will use a sensor to measure your glucose profiles to see to what extent you've actually reined in those fluctuations in sugar levels, and therefore how much you stabilized it by. And I guess an analogy I can give is, for example, if you are trying to lose weight, you have a choice. You could be measuring, you could be weighing yourself 4 or 5 times a week, for example, or every week, or you could be weighing yourself at the end of every month. Now, logic would say that weighing yourself at the end of every month makes sense, because then you can see what progress you've made. Well, similarly, with continuous monitoring, what we've seen and what we're saying here is that it is far more cost effective and far more amenable for a user to be able to use a sensor for a few days at the end of the month to actually see how interventions over the course of the month have now started to impact their glucose fluctuations and to what extent it stabilized it. And as I say, given that it's one of a kind and there are no other sensors like this currently anywhere, it therefore gives us a significant first mover advantage, and it's something that we intend to capitalize on. And with regards to where we are, therefore, from being able to sell the device, the product is already approved as a Class IIb medical device in Europe, and it is currently pending PMA approval in the US. So we've submitted a PMA application in the US. So in the UK, we have a licensee, and they have essentially started rolling out a commercial program, and they ordered 200,000 sensors and earlier last year it was, and we started delivering and fulfilling that order since December just gone. And they've also forecast up to 100,000 sensors per month for the next couple of years. So that will total over a couple of million sensors over the next couple of years potentially. And essentially, they are currently selling those sensors or planning to sell those as part of a diabetes management program. And the most recent activity has been in terms of marketing and educating and an awareness campaign, I guess, with the physician community or clinician community. And so there have been various publications in which they have published details of the program that they're offering and the sensors, of course. And over the course of the next few weeks and months, there are national advertising campaigns that have been planned for both the printed media in the papers as well as on the television in the UK. So our objective here at the moment is really to support our UK licensee as far as possible to make significant inroads into the UK market initially. And in terms of how it works, of course, the idea is that the glucose is measured on the surface of the skin and without putting a filament or a sensor into the arm. And over the course of the day, you can actually see those fluctuations. So then you can make the requisite interventions needed over the course of time in order to stabilize those fluctuations. And those interventions may well be lifestyle-based, such as diet, exercise, and even medication, for example. And over the course of approximately a year, our UK licensee undertook various user studies, and here's some of the testimonials and feedback that they've had from their users. And here's another slide just to show, and here what I've shown is the actual raw data from the actual device. And as compared to on the left here, you have data from a blood glucose meter and an invasive CGM. And then you have the data on our data on the right, and it shows that you have quite good comparability between the data sets. And of course, we've published our clinical data on our website as well. So continuing on the product positioning from a medical perspective, we've also signed a license agreement with a company in the UK where they plan to sell the devices in, well, they plan to provide the sensors in conjunction with medicines that are widely prescribed for those people with type 2 diabetes. Now, of course, a great advantage here is that the medication is provided on prescription and the sensors are being provided free of charge. And it's almost a no-brainer in that if you think about it, medication is there to help people stabilize their glucose levels, and the sensors will provide them a means by which they can now actually check to what extent the medication is working. And this is something that our licensee will plan to launch once these drugs come off patent, and the first of those drugs come off patent in Q4 of this calendar year. And the arrangement we have there is that we will merely supply the sensors to our licensee and they will be responsible for the full marketing and sales. So from our perspective, it does keep our costs at a minimum in that we are only required to incur costs as far as supplying those devices goes. And the cost price of those sensors, for example, in the US, or the price at which we will be selling it is $20 for a pack of 5 sensors. And bearing in mind that our cost of goods is expected to be around $1 per sensor. So our gross margins are quite significant in that regard. So secondly, the product positioning I wanted to talk about today is in relation to the consumer market. And here it is about, in a nutshell, it's about measuring insulin resistance. And so we've developed our own marker by which we indicate the state of metabolic health of an individual by virtue of how resistant they are to managing their blood sugar levels. And this has become increasingly important given the sheer number of publications out there that talk about the inability to manage sugar levels and spikes in sugar levels, and how that can potentially lead to many long-term chronic disease conditions. And those range from cardiovascular conditions to diabetes, of course, and dementia, and as well as obesity. So therefore, it is a significant market that we are targeting with the consumer program. And what really sets us apart is that rather than just having an app or a program or a course that somebody follows, we're able to give people a real insight into how their body is actually dealing with sugar, and in a way that is both highly cost effective because you will only need maybe 1 or 2 sensors per month, and importantly, in a way that is highly convenient and not intrusive to the patient or to the individual, whereby it doesn't penetrate the skin and it's not something they have to wear for many days on end, for example. And these are really crucial factors that have to be taken into consideration when you are offering a consumer program. And one of the questions I've been asked is, given that the whole area of metabolic health really does appear to be taking off, and a number of companies are out there also developing sensors like ours, and the question is, well, where do we therefore sit in terms of the potential competition and potential new devices that may be coming to market? Well, I give you some examples here of, there are several companies that are indeed developing sensors that sit on the surface of the skin. However, they all use microneedles. So they don't quite measure non-invasively because those needles have to penetrate the skin. There are some potentially significant issues there with microneedles, and I'll explain. When you have one needle or one sensor filament that you're trying to keep in the skin, that's all well and good. But when you've got multiple needles, whether that be half a dozen needles or a few dozen needles, the point there being that, first of all, you've got to get each and every one of those microneedles into the skin. Secondly, you've got to keep them there for the duration of measurement, whether that be for 1 day or whether that be for 5 days. And then, of course, it's got to be in the skin at the same depth where it can actually measure the glucose. And the problem you have there is that as a result of that, it can lead to a lot of bruising in the skin. And it can also lead to potential impact on the on collagen induction, for example, but it also poses a significant infection risk. But more importantly, what we found is that those needles are so small that it is actually very difficult to keep them in the skin. Therefore, the only way that you could really anchor them into the skin is to make them longer. And the problem there, of course, is that it kind of defeats the purpose in that it's then, if the needles are much longer, and let's say they're around 1 millimeter long, then that kind of defeats the objective. And so when you have longer needles, you then have even greater infection risk. And as I say, it defeats the purpose, because rather than having one filament in the skin, now you've made multiple pores in the skin with multiple needles. So that's one of the biggest challenges there. However, there are of course certain technologies that certain multinationals have been working on, which are optical or light-based. Now, again, one of the difficulties there, based on certain recent publications, is that there are potential impediments in terms of the ability of the light to reflect, and especially in people with, let's say, high levels of fat in the skin, and also different skin pigments, so darker skin, for example. So there are certain issues there. But as it stands currently, we know that we have a certain first mover advantage for a certain period of time, and we are trying to maximize and capitalize on that. So with regards to the consumer metabolic program that I mentioned earlier, the program we've called Miboko, which is intended to be Mind Body Connect. And essentially, as mentioned earlier, it is a metabolic health program that comprises an app with an integrated glucose sensor. And the point there again is that what we are trying to do here is we're trying to take the whole field of, let's say, diets and lifestyle apps to a new level by saying that, well, we're actually now measuring something in that gives you a clear insight into what is actually going on inside your body, in particular with respect to the way the body is dealing with glucose, because of the potential long-term ramifications of your body's inability to deal with glucose, if that was the case. And essentially, the way the product works is that you have an app which you download and you're on board. And when the sensors are worn, which will probably be initially once or twice a month, and that may eventually fizzle down to maybe once every quarter, for example, you'll receive a metabolic health score and a report. And part of that provides guidance to individuals with respect to how they can improve that metabolic score. And if you look at the US alone, you have almost 87 million people with prediabetes, most of whom don't actually know it. And the reason they don't know it is because they don't have a convenient or accessible methodology by which they can measure their level of insulin resistance, for example, in the body. And therefore, this does open up a huge market opportunity, and also opens up a huge opportunity for individuals to proactively take care of themselves and potentially avoid the long-term complications of not being able to manage their sugar levels adequately. If we take an example of Noom, Noom is very much a weight loss based program and app. And you only have to go back 5 or 6 years ago, where they were turning over around $10 million a year. And whereas currently they're forecast to be turning over more than $500 million per year. And primarily because of the whole digital healthcare revolution taking up. And secondly, because the public in general are a lot more proactive when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to preventative medicine. And so we believe from that perspective, our more holistic approach to healthcare, and especially metabolic health, and which can indeed, part of that will be weight loss, we believe that we have a significant offering here, which can indeed compete on par with the likes of Noom and others. And we did do a beta launch of our metabolic health program late last year, and we've kept it low key. And the idea was to gauge initial feedback. And we had what we thought was very good traction and very good uptake of the beta program. And the feedback we are having is that it certainly is something that people would use, and something that they would find extremely valuable in terms of managing their health and their well-being. And the objective is here really to make something that is affordable and sustainable over the long term. And over the course of this year, we will be launching both a direct-to-consumer program commercially, which will be available on subscription, but also going to healthcare insurers and corporate and to employers, with a view to having them adopt this program for their employees. Now, with the metabolic health program, there are several other companies, for example, that are now breaking into this space. However, none of them have their own proprietary sensor technology like we do. And these companies are predominantly using the invasive sensors that are out there. The difficulty there is that for a consumer market, it's difficult enough to motivate a person to follow a program, let alone insert a sensor filament into the arm using what is quite a significant needle. And that is how all the invasive sensors insert their invasive sensors insert the sensor filament into the arm. And this, of course, leads to bruising, and there is certainly pain associated with at least the sensor filament being pulled out of the arm at the end of use. And the use period is generally 10 to 14 days. And that 10 to 14 days wear time is in itself unnecessary because, as mentioned earlier, the whole metabolic health program focuses around interventions that will lead to an improvement in a person's state of health and wellness. And you then measure that at the end of the month, maybe using a sensor for 1 or 2 days of the month, as opposed to needing to wear it for 10 to 14 days continuously. And of course, having a 10 to 14 day sensor in itself has certain associated costs with it, which in itself would then potentially be an impediment to mass adoption. The other thing about the invasive sensors is, of course, that you do get skin bruising. And again, just want to stress that in the medical market, where you have a clinical requirement to wear such a device, that is absolutely fine and acceptable, but it is a big ask in the consumer space. So we believe that would be challenging. And for that reason, we do believe that given that we have our proprietary sensor platform to run our entire metabolic health program, that we are in a better position to do so. And with regards to intellectual property, we have several patents filed, and some granted and some pending, and certain additional patents that are yet to be published. And of course, we have substantial know-how around many aspects of the way our technology functions. And to finish off, some of the key highlights are therefore that, first of all, we have a unique continuous glucose monitoring product with a first mover advantage, where we are targeting mainly people who have type 2 diabetes, and these individuals make up over 90% of the entire diabetes population. So it's a significant market that we are working within. And given that we have a first mover advantage, it means that the opportunity is that much greater, whilst there cannot be penetration by other potential competitors into this space in the interim. We're already in the commercial stages of launch. So we are no longer a research and development company. We are now commercializing product. And that is an important milestone that we reached just a few months ago. And we also plan during the course of this year to be commencing commercial sales in additional territories. And we have various discussions ongoing. And over the course of time, we will be revealing more about those discussions and partnerships as they take place on a case-by-case basis. And then, of course, the metabolic health program, which is applicable to a significant number of people, and in the US alone, up to 90 million people are potentially our customers for the metabolic health program. And again, the full commercial launch plans is something that we will be revealing in the near future. And finally, just to mention that the company is still very tightly held by insiders, and almost 60% of the stock is held by insiders and founders. So I guess in summary, what I'm trying to say here is that we are quite fortunate to be in the position that we are, where the digital healthcare revolution is just about taking off, and people are a lot more proactive when it comes to managing their health and wellness from a preemptive perspective, from a preventative medicine perspective. And we are in a position where we have our own proprietary platform technology that will allow us to penetrate that market and serve that market. So once again, thank you all very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the event.